Good morning once again, everyone. I'm so thankful that y'all can join me. We left off last session with Genesis 29, where Leah was beginning to have, she had already had four sons, which was uh, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Now we begin Genesis 30, and we read of Rachel's reaction to her older sister having children and her not. And when Rachel saw that she bare Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister, and said unto Jacob, Give me children, or else I die. She was obviously, years were progressing, I would say, but just as we talked about before, envied. She wasn't jealous of her sister. She envied her sister. She wanted what her sister. Remember how we talked about that? But anyway, so we see Rachel in despair, whereas you can gain a lot from just this one verse because Rachel was the pretty one, had always probably been admired by men, and women had probably been envious of her entire life and for how beautiful that she was. And now we see how God, just with one simple movement, opening the womb of Leah, how he can completely turn the tables on people. And now she envies her sister, whereas her sister probably envied her and on several occasions. But now we see how quickly and easily God can turn those tables. You need to be very thankful and humble in any blessings that you have whatsoever, because God can take those away within an instant. And Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, Am I in God's stead? Who hath withheld from thee the fruit of the womb? And she said, Behold, my maid Bilhah. Go in unto her, and she shall bear upon my knees, that I may also have children by her. This was a kind of a common practice back then, and historians aren't exactly certain on what this means. It could have a literal meaning where she shall bear upon my knees, meaning that the woman, whenever she gives birth, she actually grabs a hold. She gets in between, like in this case, Bilhah would get in between, whenever she's ready to give birth, she would get in between the knees and the legs of Rachel, and then she would give birth, and then it would be a surrogate type of birth, and it would represent Rachel having the child. Or it could simply have another meaning, whereas bear upon my knees, meaning sits the child on her knee afterward and it's hers. They're not 100% certain on this, according to my research. And she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, and Jacob went in unto her. Here's the thing about this. Whenever it says this in particular, and she gave him Bilhah her handmaid to wife, that's in the literal sense. That's not what you. That's not how you should read that, because it's Bilhah is a concubine of Jacob's at this time. This is what concubines did. They did the work of a wife. And Bilhah conceived and bare Jacob a son. And Rachel said, God hath judged me, and hath also heard my voice, and hath given me a son. Therefore called she his name Dan. Now Dan means judgment, or judged. And Bilhah, Rachel's maid, conceived again, and bare Jacob a second son. And Rachel said, With great wrestlings have I wrestled with my sister, and I have prevailed. And she called his name Naphtali. This, she's probably, obviously there's a competition between these sisters at this time. And this must have just been a very chaotic household. Just having this constant bickering all the time and this constant competition. But she says Naphtali means my struggle or to wrestle. So they're actually, the competition is so deep that they're naming their children after their competition status. It's quite remarkable. This is the reason why in Leviticus 18:18 we read, Moses says, Neither shalt thou take a wife to her sister to vex her, to uncover her nakedness beside the other in her lifetime, meaning don't take your wife's sister for a wife in your wife's lifetime, because you'll be vexed just as Jacob is the entire time. And how do we know that he was vexed? Because Deuteronomy 17:17 says, "Neither shall he multiply," talking of kings and such, "neither shall he multiply wives to himself, that his heart turn not away, neither shall he greatly multiply to himself silver and gold." There's another command. Don't take upon yourself. God said, one wife, one husband, one flesh. The two shall be combined and have one flesh. This just validates what God said in the beginning and shows that God knows what is right. Whenever the Pharaoh asked Jacob, we'll learn in just a few chapters, the Pharaoh asked Jacob, he says, "Well, tell me, how's been your life's journey? How's been your journeys?" And Jacob said unto Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been." Every single time that I think about that, I'm just like, well, yeah, he was probably completely stressed by, I mean, just look who was behind him. He had two wives, two concubines, bunch of kids, bunch of chaos, and you see Joseph at this time is ruling over Egypt. Just a lot of everything's just out of control, and there's a famine in the land. There was, it's just, and what happened between him and his brother, and him and his father, and not seeing his mother again. I mean, yeah, just total chaos. And now we see this rivalry between his wives, which are sisters, which that probably escalated the entire the emotions involved there. When Leah saw that she had left bearing, she took Zilpah her maid and gave her Jacob to wife. See, this is the reason why Rachel, I believe, and upon my research, how she probably said, "Now have I won over Leah," because she noticed that Leah just couldn't bear children anymore. So Leah notices this as well. The entire camp's noticing. When Leah saw that she had left Jacob, she took Zilpah, her maid, and gave Jacob to wife, which means now Jacob has two concubines and still two wives. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a son. And Leah said, "A troop cometh," and she called his name Gad. Now, upon looking this up, I read that Gad could mean troop or fortune. So, either way, it's a meaning of a blessing. There's a fortune that troop cometh with fortune. And Zilpah, Leah's maid, bare Jacob a second son. And Leah said, "Happy am I, for the daughters will call me blessed," and she called his name Asher. Asher means, of course, happy, but you can also tell that she's keeping in mind it's kind of self-centered a little bit on Leah's part. "For the daughters will call me blessed." She says, "Happy am I." It's like, well, what about your kids? I mean, and I'm certain that she was thinking about her kids, but even commentators on this, they were talking about how this competition was, every one of them were pretty adamant about it, that this competition was deeply ingrained within Leah and Rachel. And they were bringing others into it. You see Rachel, "Give me children or I die," and then you see their handmaids being brought into it, and their handmaids have to lay with their husband, and it's like, oh man, it's getting out of hand. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest. Now Reuben is the oldest of Jacob's sons, and he is he's Leah's first. And Reuben went in the days of wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field and brought them unto his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Give me, I pray thee, of thy son's mandrakes." Just in case you're wondering what mandrakes are, the saying about mandrakes is that they are fertility stimulants, an aphrodisiac, apples pungent, the root resembles a baby's body. In all truth that we know about, they are poisonous, much like alcohol, kind of poisonous. Not the kind of poison that'll really kill you if you ingest a little bit of it, but it will create hallucinations It's a narcotic effect that it brings upon you. It contains highly biologically active alkaloids, tropane alkaloids, which are hallucinogenic and narcotic, historically used as an anesthetic in surgery. So if anybody ever asked you, does it ever mention drugs in the Bible, you can say, yeah, mandrakes were kind of like a drug, and still to this day you can find them in the Middle East. And Leah says unto Rachel, is it a small matter that thou hast taken away my husband? And wouldest thou take away my son's mandrakes also? And Rachel said, therefore he shall lie with thee tonight for thy son's mandrakes. Rachel believed that this was a way to help her get pregnant if she took these mandrakes, but as we see, and Jacob came out of the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, thou must come in unto me, for surely I have hired thee with my son's mandrakes. And he lay with her that night. She says, I traded my mandrakes, my son's mandrakes, for you to be with me tonight. And he laid with her that night, and she gets pregnant. It's astonishing to me how it said, the scripture says that he hates Leah. I believe that that's much more of an it's implying that he loved her less. I don't think that he hated her. He still has sex with her quite often. So I don't know. I mean, but men will do that, as will some women. Even if they don't like you, like your company or whatever, they'll still, I guess, use your body for pleasure, I suppose. And God hearkened unto Leah, and she conceived and bare Jacob the fifth son. And Leah said, God hath given me my hire, because I have given my maiden to my husband. And she called his name Issachar. And the name Issachar means there is a reward. Like she's being rewarded because she gave her handmaid to be Jacob's concubine and to bear another child. And we see that this is playing in a much more grand scale. God understands what's happening right here, much more than they do. Even though this competition's going on and everybody's stressed and there's tension all over the place, the 12 tribes of Israel are being created. And God's will is still in full motion. Even with all this commotion going on, God still, what he wants is still happening. And we must keep that in mind. Out of all the horrors that are happening in life, out of all the stress, so long as we still love God and we still have a heart to do his will, then his will ultimately be done through us. And Leah conceived again and bare Jacob the sixth son. And Leah said, God hath endued me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. We also learn that he has Dinah, his first daughter, his only daughter, through Leah as well. Leah is just the best of blessings to this man. They're all blessings, but Leah is just seemingly exalted above all of them. And it's probably because of the way that he treated her. And after all this time, we see, just as the meaning of Zebulun's name, it can either mean dowry or dwell, to dwell with. They're not certain on the meaning, but it means one of the two. And we see how she's still striving for the heart of her husband. It's constant competition. If Rachel had never been involved in this, there's no doubt that Jacob would have loved Leah with all of his heart. But because Rachel's in it, it's just, it's constant tension. And afterwards she bare a daughter and called her name Dinah. Dinah, one of the coolest meanings I have to say, it means avenger. That's what it means. And I don't know, might have a little hostility in there with that. And God remembered Rachel, and God hearkened to her, and opened her womb. This is a consistent theme in the scriptures. You can look back at Sarah, then Rebecca, then Leah, Rachel, Elizabeth in the New Testament, Mary. We see this constantly, how God has control over the wombs of women. and he has the ability to shut them up or to open them up so that they can bear children. So women should always keep that in mind. It is God in whom allows you that gift. It's God doing everything. It's You're not the one in whom controls that. You can go to a doctor. God may send you a doctor, but it's ultimately God that allows children to be born. Even yourself watching this and me. We were born because God opened the wombs of our mothers, and He says, "Before I formed ye in the womb, I knew ye." So He formed us before our mamas ever knew anything. Mama's sitting back eating little Debbie's and corn pops and whatever. She's just eating all kinds of stuff, and she don't know a thing about you. She just knows that there's something growing in her. It's a baby, and God knows you fully well. Every single instance, every moment, every blink, every heartbeat, everything about you from the very, very, very get-go, even eternity past. So it goes to show how much closer that God is to us than our parents. And Rachel conceived and bare a son, and said, God hath taken away my reproach. And she called his name Joseph, and said, The Lord shall add to me another son. See, she's continuing the competition again, and the very meaning of the name Joseph testifies to this, because the name means Jehovah will add. So she's expecting another son after this. And it came to pass, when Rachel had borne Joseph, that Jacob said unto Laban, Send me away, that I may go into mine own place and to my country. Give me my wives and my children, for whom I have served thee, and let me go, for thou knowest my service which I have done thee. And Laban said unto him, I pray thee, if I have found favor in thine eyes, tarry, for I have learned by experience that the Lord hath blessed me for thy sake. So Jacob's wanting to take his family and leave, go back to his own country, which is the promised land of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. So he's wanting to go back home to the promised land. And he's telling Laban, hey, we're done. I'm just going to leave. Laban says, no, tarry, meaning wait here. He says, just wait, work for me a little bit longer. And he says, name your price. And he said, appoint me thy wages, and I will give it thee. And he said unto him, Thou knowest how I have served thee, and how thy cattle was with me. For it was little which thou hadst before I came, and it is now increased unto a multitude. And the Lord hath blessed thee since my coming. And now when shall I provide for mine own house also? He says, I want to get my own house started. It's time for me to have a family. And Jacob is right now he's probably about 84, 85, mid-80s, which in today's numbers, because he lives to 147, so in today's numbers, that would be like 40, 41, 42, maybe mid-40s. For a certain, more than half of his life is gone away. And he said, What shall I give thee? And Jacob said, Thou shalt not give me anything. If thou wilt do this thing for me, I will again feed and keep thy flock. So right here's the bargain. This is what it is. He says, don't give me any money. Don't give me anything. But he says, let me look after the flock, and I will pass through all thy flock today, removing from thence all the speckled and spotted cattle, and all the brown cattle among the sheep, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and of such shall be my hire. He says, let me look after the spotted and speckled sheep and goats. So shall my righteousness answer for me in time to come, when it shall come for my hire before thy face, every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and brown among the sheep, that shall be counted stolen with me. He's basically telling him, whatever is conceived, whatever those bring forth, all the spotted and speckled that are brought forth, it's mine. And Laban said, Behold, I would it might be according to thy word. So he's saying, yeah, it's a good deal. And he removed that day the he-goats that were ring-straked, and spotted, and all the she-goats that were speckled and spotted, and every one that had some white in it, and all the brown among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. So Laban is making his sons take all the speckled and spotted sheep and goats on a 3 days journey to separate them from the main solid-colored flock in which Jacob will look over. And he set 3 days' journey betwixt himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks. And Jacob took him rods of green poplar, and of the hazel and chestnut tree, and peeled white strakes in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. He's basically just taking branches and stripping it from these different types of trees. And he set the rods, the branches, which he had peeled before the flocks in the gutters and the watering troughs when the flocks came to drink, that they should conceive when they came to drink. So they would become impregnated whenever they came to drink. We learn now, okay, just let me describe what he's doing. He's taking these branches and he's putting them in the watering troughs of the flock, the solid colored flock, and whenever they come up to drink, they conceive spotted and speckled. We learn in Genesis 31, and I do suspect that this has an awful lot to do with what he's doing. A lot of people say, well, this ain't going to make them conceive spotted and speckled. Well, whenever God's hand is involved, because we learn that God assures Jacob that he will give him increase. Jacob will have the increase from Laban's flock. See, Laban has been increased for so long. He's lived high off the horse, and Jacob doing all the work. Well, it almost all goes to Jacob at the end of it. So there is a time of work first, but there is a great time of prosperity afterwards. A lot of this prosperity gospel, they just tell you, nah, you just give us $1,000 and everything will be just fine. You'll be increased 1,000,000 times over. It's like, no, just go get off your butt, get a job, and save your money. Be smart about it. Don't listen to them preachers, false prophets. Don't listen to them. Tithe what you can, and we'll get to the tithing part later on. But it's just do what you can for the Lord. Keep your heart with God, and that's all you got to worry about. Work first. Any man that doesn't work doesn't eat. And the flocks conceived, they got pregnant before the branches, the rods, and brought forth cattle, ring-straked, speckled, and spotted. And Jacob did separate the lambs, and set the faces of the flocks toward the ring-straked, and all the brown in the flock of Laban, and he put his own flocks by themselves, and put them not unto Laban's cattle. So Jacob is going about separating what is now his from Laban's, which is solid colored. And Laban, he had already separated by 3 days' journey, long way off. He had already separated the speckled and spotted that he already had from that of what is coming out now. The odds were, to man's worldview, the odds were terribly in Laban's favor. But because God's hand was involved in it, we'll learn in the second chapter more about that, but because God's hand was involved in it, all the favor goes to Jacob. But we also see it's not just about these branches. There was selective breeding done by Jacob, and I would guess that it was also ordered like that, or maybe he just knew more about how to deal with cattle, sheep, goats, and such. He was just a better farmer than what we are today, just knew more. And it came to pass, whensoever the stronger cattle did conceive, that Jacob laid the rods, the branches, before the eyes of the cattle in the gutters, that they might conceive among the rods. But when the cattle were feeble, he put them not in. So the feebler were Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. He's separating the strong from the weak. That way he'll have a more abundant flock. He's very, very smart in this. So it's not just branches, it's also selective breeding. And Laban's not there. Laban, he trusts that Jacob will take care of his flock, and he's taking care of it all right. And the man increased exceedingly, and had much cattle, and maidservants, and men servants, and camels, and asses. We see this quite often. We've seen this with Abraham, how he went, and he was in a dire situation with Pharaoh and Abimelech, but at the end, he gets their wealth. Like, he gets an awful lot of wealth from them. He becomes wealthy from them. The same thing happens with Joseph later on. He's treated very badly by Potiphar in Egypt and his brothers, but at the end, he's ruler over all of them. And he's got tremendous amounts of wealth. He's pretty much one of the only few wealthy men in the entire world. His wealth even exceeds that of Jacob. So we see this constantly, how God gives rulership over the enemies of those in whom stick with him. And we see it again with Jacob. And just for a quick rehash on the chapter with the sons, we have Leah giving birth to the first four, which is Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Judah is the one in whom, that's the lineage of Christ, where Christ comes out of. That comes from Leah, not from Rachel. Then we see Dan, which is from one of his concubines. The next four are from concubines, which is Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher. Then we see Leah giving birth to the next three, which is Issachar, Zebulun, and Dinah. And Dinah being the only daughter of his. So not only does Leah get to bless him with all these sons, and these significant sons, such as the firstborn Reuben, then Judah, but also with Dinah, his first daughter. And then we see Rachel at the very end with Joseph, and we'll come to Benjamin. And that is, Lord willing, to come. So I do so appreciate y'all for listening. Hope y'all enjoyed this. May the God of mercy and peace and love be with you all. Amen.